Good afternoon, everyone. Can we settle down? We'll start the session. It's a post-lunch session, so the usual problems after lunch, and after a good lunch, it's even more difficult. And then the last session before the closing, so again, attendance tends to be thin. So what I'll request is for the panelists to come up. Madhav, Shivanand. As far as the others, why don't you come up a little further so we don't look very scattered? And if the mics don't work, it's not a problem. Let me start by very quickly introducing the panel to you. We have Madhav Pai, who will be making a brief introductory presentation which will set the stage for the discussions after that. Madhav is the head of EMBARQ India. He's the director EMBARQ India. He's been doing a lot of work. I've known Madhav for several years now, and I've seen how he's helped build up EMBARQ in India. It's really fascinating the way it has grown. That's Madhav. Then we have Shomik. Shomik is a colleague of mine here at the bank. Shomik grew up in India, did his undergrad in the Banaras Hindu University. It was one of the very old and prestigious institutes we had in India. He moved over to the US and did his master's and further studies at UC Berkeley, which we all know the kind of quality that you see in UC Berkeley. He's now a colleague who knows a lot about India. He's worked through the bank also in a few projects in India. But I think the greatest strength that Shomik brings in to this panel is his experience in China. He was based in Beijing for about 3 years. He's seen the kind of things that have happened in China, been very closely involved with China's urban transport program, and has now moved to the Latin America region, where he's seeing the kind of things that are happening in many of the Latin American countries. So I thought he would be able to bring in a lot of perspectives from outside, which could be good things for India to pick up from. We have Professor Shivanand Swamy. Professor Shivanand Swamy is really the think tank behind a lot of the urban transport projects going on in the country, particularly on BRT systems, other bus-based systems, land use planning issues. And his institute is one of the very prestigious institutes. And I, for one, have seen many of his students, and the quality of the students he comes up with is something that has fascinated me for a long time. Professor Swamy. Dr. Sudhir Krishna is really, it's his responsibility to guide the urban development in the country. Madhav's presentation will show you the magnitude of the problems that are there. It's Dr. Sudhir Krishna's responsibility, and a huge, huge challenge for him in how do you manage this in a manner that really makes the cities the engines of economic growth in the country. Dr. Krishna is a member of the Indian Administrative Service, which he joined in 1977, so almost 35 years of experience in that. He's held various positions both at the national government as well as in the state government of Karnataka. He also worked for a long time with the National Academy of Administration. That's the place where young recruits into the civil services get groomed, and that, to my mind, is again a huge responsibility in training people from an early stage in their career on how do you perform. Then we have Karla Gonzalez, who Joined the bank about 4 months ago, but huge experience outside the bank. And I think the mix of what she's seen outside at the ground level, how things happen, combined with what she's seen in the bank and the kind of things the bank can do, is the kind of perspective that I would request her to bring. And finally, Adriana. Adriana heads the Mexico arm of EMBARQ. And she's worked for a long time. It's always been very interesting for me to talk to Adriana and learn from her what's happening in Mexico, what's happening in other parts of Latin America. So I thought if Adriana joins this panel, maybe she can tell us, what's happening in the countries that she's familiar with. This brief introduction, let me quickly move on and ask Madhav if you could give us that presentation and tell us where we stand.
Thank you, OP, for the introductions, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm just going to show you some numbers to just sort of highlight the scale of, almost challenges, the numbers are catastrophic, what we see in sort of the impact of sort of urban development in our cities. So I'm just going to sort of show that, and then also sort of quickly highlight some of the big opportunities we have actually to change sort of these challenges into big opportunities. And these are opportunities just not for India. I think it will have impact as on sort of the whole world. So just quickly highlighting, we've heard of the urbanization story. But we're going to really see the rapidest urbanization now in India in the next decade or two. About 200 to 230 million, estimates vary. There'll be new urban residents in India by 2030. So this is, really, this is, almost the population of the United States. So imagine a whole country moving into cities in India. There are other estimates vary. But this is going to be the biggest sort of growth. What this means also is in 2012, we had 12 million new two-wheelers. There were 12 million two-wheelers sort of bought in 2012. And, what it does is it makes our cities look like this. And I think this is a really big challenge. We really need to address the problem of the motorcycles. We need to understand it. And I know there is a parallel session right now talking about motorcycles, and hopefully they have some important lessons that they can sort of give to us. But, the whole challenge of motorization, they used the two-wheelers and the transition from the two-wheelers to using cars, and just the impacts of sort of all the negative externalities that come with motorization are there. The numbers, it's just exponential growth. And cars and two-wheelers, it's just been phenomenal in the last decade, and the next decade is going to be even greater. We have also in India, this is numbers from 2008, but we had 10% of the world's fatalities, 120,000 deaths. Road fatalities, and this is extremely serious. This is at sort of the levels of motorization we currently have. So I think as we motorize further, it's really scary, sort of just the thought of what this means to the road fatalities. And just these are some comparisons of cities 10 years ago, road fatalities 10 years ago, and between 2001 and 2009, and you can see the numbers. Some cases it has tripled. The road fatalities, this is fatalities per year, and the number is tripled in some cases. And it's just almost uniformly, there is a sharp increase. And this is World Health Organization data. Also outdoor air pollution, and these are sort of recent numbers that have come from a World Health Organization study. Again, really, 2.1 million sort of worldwide deaths due to outdoor air pollution, and 700,000 for South Asia. About 40%, almost 400,000 of those can be attributed to India. So again, this is another big challenge, and urban transport and energy use will increase, 5 to 7-fold. Now, this is some work that, Lee Schipper actually did many years ago, and he did some scenarios for 2030. And what he showed is we had these sort of different paths that we could take from 2000 to actually build urban transport in our cities, where the emissions don't grow 5 to 7-fold, they only grow 3 to 4-fold, and all of this has sort of huge impacts on all sorts of the negative externalities. So really, the big question for us is, how do we get to this scenario, which is what Lee used to call sustainable transport, urban transport plus extra effort, which means sort of really also making sure we have all the demand management policies in place. And what I'll do in the next couple of slides is actually translate, see, this is at the national scale, but look at Ahmedabad and see sort of the opportunities rapidly growing Ahmedabad has to really contain these externalities. So, if you look at Ahmedabad, so what you see on the left, you see Ahmedabad in 1992, which is about 3.3 million people, and then in 2011, when it's almost double the size, and most of these images also come from some work that's been done at CEPT University. And we did some, just using the same principles as Lee did at the national level, we did some scenarios for Ahmedabad at the city scale. And what we say is Ahmedabad is going to grow from 5 million people to 13 million people by 2040. If 40% of Ahmedabad's modal share is cars, and if we look at sort of how much the city will have to grow, looking at LA or some other Houston cities which have grown like that, they will have to grow to 6,000 square kilometers. That's the only way to accommodate that phenomenal growth in motor vehicles. Well, luckily Ahmedabad is not going that far. They've already made some rapid strides. They've built a fairly large mass transport system very quickly. And I think now the big challenge is also how to really leverage the mass transport system to make sure that land use transport integration happens and the city sort of grows at a much smaller scale. The point I want to make here is that the difference on externalities just from transport between the two scenarios here, the sort of automobility scenario where cars dominate, and a scenario where we have sort of really good integrated land use transport, is almost a scale of 1:10. 12 million tons of CO2, 2 million tons of CO2. 5,000 fatalities, if we use today's crash rates, and which is going to be higher as motorization grows, to 1,000 sort of fatalities. So I think this is the biggest opportunity India has, is really making good choices, making sure our urban growth boundaries don't really grow too much, and just by sort of saving that every extra square kilometer, we can really impact sort of the impact of the urban development. But we also want to make sure that good planning happens so that the quality of life, etc., is not impacted as we build these integrated cities. Just another piece of work that actually CEPT University did as part of their work for the recommendations for the 12th five-year plan is to look at infrastructure estimates. And again, I think what they saw is the costs, the costs to build a higher density, more compact city is about a third smaller than sort of doing less dense, broader city. And I think, again, this is another advantage, is you can do it cheaper. This is when Jaime Lerner always says, you cut the zeros and then you get the best solutions. This is sort of a clear example also of how not only will it be lower externalities, it will be a lower cost, and all we need to do is make sure there is good quality of life with all of this. So quickly, I think this is just to sort of highlight the scale of the opportunity in India, to quickly tell you what the national government is doing in numbers, very big numbers. Over the last 5 years, there was the 12 billion program of JNURM, out of which $1 billion was for bus rapid transit projects, $1 billion was for buses for cities, another $500 million was spent on supported technology for infrastructure and transit, and about $19 billion outside the JNURM program was provided to support rail metro. There is a draft 12th five-year plan, which is for the next 5 years, and hopefully Dr. Sudhir Krishna will highlight more the details of this. But again, just to give you, the government sees transport as a big priority, right? It's a 25-year horizon. Some estimate, these are estimates, and about half of that is meant to be, more than half of that is meant to be for transport, and just sort of a split of sort of the various sort of categories in which these investments will be made. So all I wanted to do is highlight some scale with these numbers, and really look forward to a very nice discussion. Thank you. So what I also want to do, what I also want to do is set up two questions, and we don't have to limit to this. We can, really very broad questions. Is this enough to actually, we saw the example of Ahmedabad building good public transport, but for other cities, is this kind of a program, is this kind of an approach enough to build adequate public transport? And then what can we do? What policies, instruments do we need that we can learn from Mexico or China also to ensure that there is land use transport integration? So, thank you.
Just go to that slide on population growth. Graph. Yeah. Thanks, Madhav. I think there's one other aspect I would like to highlight along with these various other externalities. A lot of the energy that is consumed in transport in India is imported. We don't produce enough oil, so most of this oil is imported. And year after year, the kind of import bill that we are paying for in terms of foreign exchange is massive. So question that comes to my mind is, are we going to soon reach a day when everything we earn through our exports will be spent only in buying oil? And the kind of price fluctuations that we've seen in the energy market, particularly the crude oil market, how vulnerable does it make the country in terms of its energy security? That's a kind of a strategic question. But let me leave it at that. You see, someone once said, if you look at this, 2011 to 2030, it's a near doubling of the population. So what we are really seeing is, in less than one generation, we're going to add as many people to urban India as we've added since the beginning of mankind. It's a huge problem, and I don't know how many sleepless nights you must be spending thinking of this kind of a problem and what you're going to do with this problem. I honestly don't envy you. But if you can give us an idea of what you see as the main challenges, and it's a huge problem, but what do you see as some of the main challenges, some of the main opportunities that exist in this? Dr. Krishna.
It is good afternoon to all, and it is a matter of great delight for me to be participating in this session, which is focusing on our large country. And I should say that the opportunities have to be appreciated in the context of the urbanization, for which figures are right here. And there are two ways of looking at it. One is that which we had all along felt in our country. And I don't know if anybody here was in the Barcelona program 2 months before that World Bank had organized. You were there, and the presentation was made where they said that the policy that we pursued from the beginning of our independence was that India lives in villages and India's future should lie in villages. And now today we are realizing the biggest folly of our time of following that line. I'm just saying, not as a pessimist or not to criticize, but just as a realism I want to bring in the scenario. That we consciously, our country pursued the policy of focusing on preventing people to come to cities on one side, and also preventing population growth consciously as a state policy. On both fronts we have proved to be wrong. On both the fronts our country has proved that we pursued wrong policies. And if national level you pursue wrong policy as a state policy and pursue it vigorously, then you pay very heavy price. But only thing is, there is no need crying over spilt milk. We have to look for the future. And pursuing the policy of ruralization led to the situation where people could not come to the urban areas, and they remain in rural areas, and they kept on sharing the land holding, which have become very minuscule now. The average land holding is of the order of 1 hectare, and large part of it is 1 acre. Less than half of an hectare, that is the large part. So it did not help us. And those who came to city could not find a planned city welcoming them. and therefore they ended up living and contributing to the slums. So all these things now are reversing, and I see urban growth as the opportunity for both the non-urban areas where people should live only if they wish to. Only those who love agriculture should live in the rural areas. Those who wish to pursue non-agricultural activities should find opportunities, and opportunity can come only in the urban area. That is how urban area is defined. There is no strict definition of urban area. It is just a planned, concentrated agglomeration of humanity. That is all urban area. There is nothing very mystic about urban area. So this is how now we have realized, and we want the urban population, which is 37.7 million now, out of a population of 1,200 million. We would like it to become like 90% of the population should live in urban areas. That is one side. And it will ease the pressure on the rural land holding. And this is the call of that time. And planned urbanization is the future of the country. And transit-oriented planning is the future of urbanization. These are the sequence, no? The sequence. So those who are in urban transport sector, those who are thinking, at least for our country, and I would probably think it will be true for any country, but let me talk about, because the theme today is India and this session. So you are in the right time, right place, and big opportunity on a conceptual framework. So that is point number one. And in fact, the population contribution is just about 31% to urban areas, which has to go to 90%, as I said. So we are conscious about supporting planned urbanization, and in that context we want planned mobility solutions. And we have got the National Transport Development Policy Committee. Dr. Rakesh Mohan was here yesterday, and the National Urban Transport Policy 2006. Now the issues which we focus on is the institutional integration, capacity building, strengthening of public transport, including non-motorized transport, personal and public both, non-motorized part, pedestrianization, and then mass transit systems, including the bus and BRT, metro rail. And as far as technology side is concerned, management issues are there, which includes the Intelligent Transport Management System, ITS, and so on. The investment figures were given by Madhav. So that much is that is actually conservative. Our estimation is that it is a conservative estimate of $500 billion investment required in urban transport sector is a conservative estimate. But still, since we are still far away from it, so we are not questioning very seriously that level, but opportunities are there. It can be taken that opportunities to cross that figure is there. And Madhav has already said how much is bicycling and so on and so forth, by all that. We also have this concept of funding through viability gap funding program. That is when we have JNNURM program, which Madhav referred to. That is a government budgetary support program. But now we want to look beyond it. Because out of the $1 trillion in urban infrastructure, including $500 billion for urban transport, we can never hope to achieve this through the budgetary sources alone in the next 10 to 20 years also. And we don't want to wait that long. So we are looking for solutions which are financially viable, which can pay for themselves. And now we find that a breakthrough is in the offing. Now the ITS suppliers, we have advised them, and if anybody is working on that the ITS, each project should be viewed in terms of investment and returns. How much savings it will bring in management of the transportation system. Apply ITS in the city transport management. How much savings you will have in more efficient and effective transport management. That should pay for the investment. It seems to be possible. In fact, we are also working out on models where mass transit systems, including the BRT, buses, and the metro should pay for themselves. It is possible. And if you work on that, business potential improves substantially. Several folds it goes up. Now, just to give some numbers before I conclude, if metro rail, if one is looking for large monies, investment in terms of large monies, then metro rail projects, large monies are involved in. metro rail projects. I mean, of the order of 300 crore rupees per kilometer is the investment on an average. And that we have got in various cities now. Already it is in projects are under operation in Delhi and Bangalore, and under implementation in Kolkata, Chennai, and Kolkata Old Metro is also operating. A new project is coming up. Chennai, Kochi, and we are also in Pune and Ludhiana and umpteen other cities, Nagpur, Ahmedabad, and Surat also is showing interest in metro project. And we have other cities like Bhubaneswar, Guwahati. It all depends. If the key is lying in the suppliers going little beyond just supplying the equipments. If the suppliers can integrate their business model with the financing model also, and participate in little more in value addition of their services, the business opportunities will multiply. Rather than just saying that here is the metro coach and take it and you build the viaduct and run it. That is one way. I mean, it will take time for people to understand how to go about it. That is what is happening. I see cities after city just wandering in wilderness. Somebody should tell me how to have metro. And they go on thronging around the Delhi metro. Please prepare project report for us. Every city is chasing Delhi metro rail that you please prepare the project report for us. You please put the metro for us. We don't know what to do. If some suppliers can come forward to say that I'll prepare project report for you, or say you prepare project report, I'll supply you with financing and so on, it will definitely improve the possibilities and things can come much faster. Jaipur also, I forgot, Jaipur also is very much in the offing. Then we are also into regional rapid transit systems. Recently, Delhi Panipat, Delhi Meerut and Delhi to Alwar via Gurgaon and Rewari, total length of 260 km has already been approved in principle. And now DPRs are under preparation. The pre-feasibility report is already finalized and approved. Now DPRs under preparation. And side by side, I said non-motorized transport as well as the other end is pedestrianization and public bicycling. All these things also are getting attention. And mobility card, I mentioned in the earlier session that mobility cards, we want to issue common mobility card, smart chips, which you can use for multimodal transit systems. So all these will become far more viable if financing model is attached. And also we are advising now the DPR guidelines we are modifying to mandate that DPR should include the financing model which will have the investment as well as the return, as well as governance model also. Who will do what? How to implement this mobility plan, or how to implement whatever project is there, who will have what role. That should be specified in the DPR itself so that the plan program can be implemented. So I look forward to the contribution from other co-panelists as well as the esteemed delegates here on the theme. Thank you.
I mean, it's really mind-boggling. The magnitude of the numbers, and Madhav put out a figure of $871 billion in the next 20 years. And Dr. Sudhir Krishna has said this is conservative. So it's really huge. I mean, that kind of investment is huge. And trying to make them financially viable and return being there, it really needs a whole new gamut of thinking on how these kind of projects will earn a return. Traditionally, it's all been returns come out of fares, but are there other options for these operating entities to earn money which can go into making the whole thing financially viable? I mean, a lot of times I say that if we call cities the engines of economic growth, it's the transport system that functions as the wheels of this engine. And if the transport system stops functioning, the engine doesn't move. So the criticality of the transport system in cities being the engines of economic growth is something which is critical. It's really critical if cities really have to function. Now, given these numbers, the magnitude of funds required, I'll move to Karla and ask her, what do you see the opportunity for the bank?
Now you're giving me Is this on? Yes. You're giving me the worst part, huh? Thank God President Kim was in the morning very clear that it's not about funds, but knowledge sharing. So that will help a lot. Well, I have to say that in our portfolio, actually at the moment, we have 7 billion for South Asia, and 7 million, and 5 out of those 7 billion, are for India. And out of that 5 billion, we are having just 30% of projects in urban. So we have to see how can we develop that portfolio in a different way, because up to now, we have been concentrating our efforts mainly on roads, mainly on developing roads. And when you see the numbers, it's very clear for us to see that it's time for us to change that kind of engagement. And I can see that one of the things that we are doing at the moment is through knowledge sharing with BRT systems and trying to develop a good partnership among the states and the national level. So that is the kind of engagement that we can provide to the table. And as Mr. Krishna was rightly saying, it is very important to bring that kind of room to talk about the issues from each state within different perspective, but trying to bring them along with Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, different ways of seeing things as we can see it in other places. On top of that, we have to say that one of the biggest challenges that we can see now in India is related to safety. And if we take the number of 32 people dying in the roads every hour in India, we can see that there is a major challenge for us to tackle. And we cannot tackle that challenge just by paying attention to a better designs in the roads, but we have to diversify the options for the users. We have to come out with inland waterways. We have to bring trains, light trains also, not only fast, high trains. And we need definitely to put a lot of attention to the culture, the way that the people are thinking on the road. When you see that most of the highways are packed by people that are not only using the road, they are living there. And when you can see that from a broader perspective, you can see that we have a major challenge of how can we tackle that kind of mind or that kind of idea or that kind of culture. This is the kind of challenge that we have. There is no point on building 4 lanes or 6 lanes without taking into consideration that there is a lot of people that are going to be killed the minute that you open that lane, because they are living there. And when you see the way that they are investing in those highways, up to now, you can see that the designs doesn't take into consideration the pedestrians at all. And we don't want the people to stop walking. We do want them to keep walking. So we need to find ways to bring on these kind of challenges into the designs and into the ways that we want to continue our engagement with India.
Thanks, Karla. I think you dwelt a lot upon the knowledge contribution that the bank could make.
I'm sorry.
And
Sorry. We were here having a joke, so.
let me turn to Professor Swamy. Now, do you see this as a huge opportunity or a challenge to you in terms of the manpower that is going to be needed, the competence and the manpower that is going to be needed to take up this kind of a planning exercise? And what do you think you would be able to do or needs to be done in meeting this potential capacity gap?
I think it's a challenge and it's an opportunity, and it's both ways if you look at it that way. Today, its issue is not just transport, and you have a wide range of cities, the small and the big. I think that's number one, and it poses a very different kind of a challenge, and they're all housed in different contexts. South Indian small city is different than that of what you see in North India, and then the culture has to be integrated and brought into this transport part of it in somehow. I think that's one major content part of it which I would like to emphasize, and therefore your solution matrix, or even what you might call it as a landscape, has to be context specific and culture included. I think that's a challenge which we need to develop. And we need to unlearn quite a bit of what we have learned. I may say here, hopefully I will be pardoned for saying it, what we have learned from here, from context here, basically. The focus on car-oriented planning, training methodologies, methods, and everything else. And how do we invent and go back something of our own? How do we evolve? That is going to be very critical. Because every time you go to any small city, a big city, other day we had a conference where we were talking about hill cities and the Simla. And there's a say, yes, we want a metro. We have transport problem. What would you like to have? I want a metro. I think that mindset of mode-specific orientation need to change, and we need to go back to solution-oriented kind of stuff. That's where we're talking about. Now, there are many more, of course. The capacities, we talk about public sector. Planning is largely seen as a public sector-oriented kind of an activity there, which is true. But then, if you look at the private sector, and I think it's even more worse there. What we are doing as things in the country today in terms of urban transport are totally new and so much more different. And we don't have contractors, we don't have operators, and we don't have even people who comes and designs all of that part of it. And therefore, it is not just that academia who comes and trains people to plan things. You need people to plan things, you need people to operate things, you need people to build things, and differently. I think that's the kind of a scope which is enormous there. And ministry has enabled a few institutions in the recent past, and where one of us is Center of Excellence, trying to do our bit, but that's only a small bit there, and I think that has to expand to a very, very broad spectrum. And it's important that it's just not economics, it is not engineering, it is not planning, and it's not spatial planning. I think bringing in a multidisciplinary kind of a focus into these programs is going to be a big challenge, and therefore, where do you house them? You put it into an engineering department, like it or not, it will continue as an engineering, and you put it into architecture, then it becomes a design exercise. That's another challenge which we probably will have there. I think we need many more centers of excellence to be able to take this agenda forward, and mindsets have to change, and it just cannot be just transport planning, and I think it's a mobility management or access planning. I think that's probably the way one would like to look at it. Thank you.
I don't know if there's been some exercise in CEPT or any other community like this, that with this kind of a projection, what is the kind of manpower need that you will have, say, over the next 20 to 30 years? I don't know if this has been done, and how would institutes come together to try and create this manpower? Some kind of a structured way of making this capacity available in the country. Or you think there is a scope to do something like this? And
the RICS have made a study on assessing the technical manpower for India as a whole, not sectorally so much. And because until that study I came across, I always used to believe that we have surplus of civil engineers in our country, but they proved that we have serious deficit, very serious deficit of civil engineers, and not only that, every other discipline in engineering, and so on and so forth. So assessment has been made, and now we are negotiating with the schools of planning and architecture for opening the spatial planning courses more, and architecture courses, if they can have one more discipline added to become that, and so on. Metro rail technology, we are tying up already. Delhi IIT and IIT Chennai have, in collaboration with the respective metro rail companies, started a postgraduate diploma program in metro rail technology, which is like assured job. I mean, metro rail company will select the candidates, and then they will not be given job. They will be put through training, and if they cross certain threshold of performance level, then only they will be taken on the payroll of the company. Both these have done, but a lot more has to be done. Lot more has to be done.
I think education programs can contribute to human resources over a long period of time, because numbers are going to be small. I think what probably is critical is that what we already have, there are people in place, and how do we retrain them and reorient them? And one of the program, the bank's latest program, is, I think, is a major initiative. How we upscale it and then convert that into some kind of a master's program level at some point in time, and then go across the country. I think is a good idea, and many more of that kind can happen.
Let me turn to Adriana. Adriana, you've heard the magnitude of this problem, and you've probably seen this in Mexico. I mean, what do you think from your experience in Mexico or other parts of the world? I mean, how do they deal with this? Did this really happen in these kinds of numbers? What is it that you would suggest in this scenario?
Well, first thing is, of course, the problem in Mexico, or this challenge is big, but compared to Indian numbers, they would have only in cities 6 times almost our population. So, but I think the experience in Mexico is very relevant. First, because we have 80% of the population that is already urban. So most of the challenge of getting the people from the countryside to the cities has already happened. It's still going on, but it's mostly happened already there. And we have now a challenge of different sizes of city. For example, we have Mexico City, which is the 2nd largest city in the world, with a very particular problem. And then we have another range of Monterrey, Guadalajara, 3 to 5 million, and then 5 other with more than 1 million. And then we have a range of cities that are between 500 to 1 million people, 22 cities actually. If we add all this, we will think that we would need about 2,200 to 2,500 kilometers of mass transit only. Let's say, because this is the big infrastructure, this is the one that really needs, let's say, the big money infrastructure. And then, but then the challenges are actually bigger. Because when we go to Mexico City and we look what's going on in this city, I think it's a good example for the others. We have a big metro network. It's 240 kilometers over 43 years, 42, 43 years. But still, it's only 14% of all the trips in the city. 50% of the trips are already on buses, are still on buses. There is, there is already like 3-4% that are on BRTs. But the thing is that the rate we have been able to build metro is slower than the needs of the city. It's a big network, but still it's like we built when the country was having very nice money from oil. The networks grew fast, but now that the country is not having this very big money, and it's not all applied to the capital, then the rate has decreased a lot. We built 1 new line in this administration, but the city actually got to a big debt that's making trouble to move it forward. We are not going to be able to invest in a new metro line in this administration, for example. And it's only 24 kilometers. BRT has been a very good complementary thing to the metro, I think, because the BRT has grown 100 kilometers in the city in only 7 years. So I think the city now really has a challenge of speed. And rail is an important solution. The metro has been a very important solution to Mexico City, but the whole solution is more than this. We need to take care. So the new thinking is can we really go to integration? We know we are going to be slower in trains inside the cities. It's going to happen, probably 1 line every 1 or 2 administrations, but we need about 200, it's almost at least 2 new metro networks that we need to build. So we need alternatives to this. And we need to take care of the feeders, because if the feeder is not good, people are not going to mass transit. And then all this new trend in the local side, in Mexico City, has been very important in some way as an example to the other cities in the country. First, when we started building BRT, then there was a thing that there is more need for public transport. There is Protram. Paco is here. He works for Protram, the national program. And I can say that this national program has been it's turning out to be a very effective mechanism. In only 3 years working, we have over 42 projects presented, which 6 or 7 are under construction now. A few of them are going to be inaugurated this year. And then when we take a look over the balance of money, and I think this is something that we will have to review now that there is a new administration, also federal new administrations, we used $500 million to one suburban line in the Mexico City region and $280 million to 11 BRTs in intermediate and even big cities. So if we have a limited amount of money, the balance of the systems is going to be important in terms of the speed we are going to be able to advance in terms of. And then I would go to still one level higher, which is integrating transport with land use. And I would say that this is a place where we still have a big challenge. We are looking at transport infrastructure probably quite one-sided. It depends on the city, it depends on the degree of development of the city itself and which projects they are requiring to the federal government. But I think that's still a challenge. Mexico is sprawling very fast, so many of these mass transport solutions are not the best solutions for many of the intermediate cities. Many of the metro lines are having very poor, even the suburban line in Mexico City is having a very poor financial result. You know, we expected 300,000 people a day, we are having 120. So we are in deep financial problem with this line, and it's because the feeders are not really working. So first, I would say, is we need to consider the system. It's very nice to see the trunk lines, but we really need to see the whole system so that it works. Second, the financial challenge is a very high challenge. How can we expand fast, because population is really having more problem in travel times and all the other externalities. And the third one, which I think we have to move fast, but it's much harder, is how to integrate transport and land use in the planning with some incentive from the federal government. We know federal government cannot really do it, but the way the money, because municipalities are usually very poor in terms of what they can do by themselves, what federal government does will definitely affect on how the cities are going to grow in the future. Thank you.
I think the messages I get from you on this are very strong emphasis on integration. So if you're building a facility, a metro, integration with feeders, integration with land use, integration with a whole lot of other things, transit-oriented development, that is one message I'm getting out of you. The other message is, yes, the investments are huge, and if you really go with this kind of an investment, there is a stage when you begin to slow down. Investments cannot keep pace with your needs because money doesn't become available at that pace. That's two messages I'm getting from you.
Absolutely.
Shomik, with experience in China, experience in LAC, having seen a lot of India, what I would request Shomik to do is, if you can give us a little idea on what's happening in China, more so, more than Beijing and Shanghai, what is Chinese policy or what is their thinking on, say, the medium-sized cities, the smaller cities, and looking at the kind of growth they are going to face? What is China trying to do about these? And similarly, in various countries that you've seen in Latin America, what is your advice?
Thanks, OP. Going last to this very illustrious panel is hard. I'm going to just start by giving a little bit of context. Being an Indian, culturally very Indian, believing very strongly in some of the things most Indians hold dear. When I came to China, I started working in China, I was shocked. I mean, I was very impressed, as everybody is, by this implementation capacity. You said $870 billion over 20 years in all of transport. In the last 10 years, China has spent significantly more. The numbers I remember from even 5-6 years ago were about $100 billion a year across the country for urban infrastructure, out of which 40-50 billion a year were spent on transport. Again, this is implementation capacity. I wouldn't always agree that all the money was very well spent, but that's true everywhere. Implementation capacity, a creativity to mobilize finance. Again, I wouldn't always agree that some of those sources of finance are the ideal ones. But the creativity to mobilize finance at the local level, and this kind of get-it-done mentality of really getting things done, which was very, very impressive. But what was, to me, more surprising, given as an Indian, I always held very near and dear, what I felt most proud about India was our democratic experiment, was that in terms of transport, in terms of cities, the Chinese cities reflected a much more vigorous democracy than any Indian city ever did. Let me explain what I mean. That there is no way you can build a road in a Chinese city that does not have a bike lane. It is inconceivable in a Chinese city to build a road or a bridge that doesn't have a pedestrian sidewalk. There is abuse of all those things. There's bike lanes that are not built well, and sometimes cars go and park on them. Sometimes cars go on sidewalks. But the concept that you can build roads and operate roads in a city where 60-70% of your trips are made by walking and cycling, without having pedestrian sidewalks, and without having, oh, everyone can hear me, no? Oh, video recording, please move mic closer, thank you. Cycle paths in China would be inconceivable. And then how money should be spent, that, they argue with us about the effectiveness of bus priority. But when I went to China in 2002, there were over 100 cities, or every city in China, more or less, and 100 cities with 1 million people, so that's not saying anything. Hundreds of cities with good formal bus systems. Not to say that they're perfect. But again, for a city mayor to run a city without a good bus system and just have cars on the road, inconceivable. Then I felt very, very strange about that. I felt like somehow democracy was obviously not the panacea I was looking for. But it helped to come to lack. It helped to come to lack in this time. I've been in lack only 2 years, in Latin America, sorry. You go to Buenos Aires, you go to Bogota, you go to Sao Paulo, you go to Rio, you go to Mexico. When you hear a mayor or anybody talk about transport, they talk about cycling, they talk about walking, they talk about public transport, they talk about restricting cars, they talk about getting a public transport that very much reflects the need of what I would consider a democracy. So, I've been trying to, since you asked me to join this panel, trying to see how I could make sense out of all of this in a way that makes sense for India. And some of the lessons that come from China about implementation capacity, and some of the lessons come from Latin America, perhaps, are about how to create a city that's more responsive, perhaps, to its citizens than often I find Indian cities to be. And I'll try and summarize them in maybe 3 or 4 things. I'll probably go over that. The first, I think, the one lesson that you get from everywhere where cities are responsive to their needs, whatever the needs are, the needs of growth or the needs of their citizens, is decentralization. Okay? You cannot have effective cities unless you put money, power, and ability to, budgetary authority and administrative authority and political authority to the city level. I think this is the power of LAC.
You know, the mayor of Mexico City is a powerful person. The mayor of Bogota, the mayor of Sao Paulo, the mayor of Rio, the mayor of Buenos Aires. These people, they make decisions, and they're answerable to the public. In Chinese cities, they're answerable to the public much more so than people realize. But that answerability of the decision maker to public is the central link. In India, that link is missing today, in my view, okay? Because cities are not run by elected officials. The elected officials at a provincial level, levels respond to rural voters, because that's where the votes are. They don't respond to cities. And there's no money in cities, no administrative power. This is critical. The second is, everywhere that I have worked, I've worked very little in India, but there has been a acceptance, at least most places, or maybe with one exception, of what I would call, and I hate to use this word, but it is true, international best practice. Okay? That there is no argument in China or Bogota or Sao Paulo about the role of markets. How critical that markets work. Markets exist. You have to work with markets. There is no question about the role of pedestrians and cyclists in public transport. There is an openness to just listen and learn from the best of the world. Okay. Your solution to engineers you need, China has more engineers at the moment who can do everything, you know, but it is never conceivable in the Indian context to allow, you know, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 engineers and architects to come and work in India. That the Chinese, you know, I left some of my soul in China. You know, this is a problem. I'm not an independent observer. But they let people in, they learn what they want from them, and then when they're good enough, they say, okay, now Chinese language and culture is an important thing. But until then, we'll get it from outside. They make no, they think twice about it. Doesn't matter where you come from. They pay for your expertise. So this commitment to the best, and say, we'll figure out how to do it. You know, the wonderful thing about China is every day you look, everything looks all wrong. But if you look at the progress they've made in the last 10 years, everything looks fantastic. So they have this commitment to some final goals, and they muddle through in a very, and I think that is something we have to do. We have to be pragmatic in the short term, but we have to have a very clear sense of international best practice and commitment to that in the long term. The third thing that I learned from China, if I might, is this value of experimenting. You know, the biggest thing I think China has given to the development world is this actual ability and willingness to fail. You know, to cross a river with many small steps and to learn by doing. Not to spend too much time worrying about this or that, but just try it. You know, you try it 15 different ways until you find the way that works. Okay? And that is something that I think is very, very, very critical of the Chinese way of doing things, that I think is worth not worrying about failure, and to create incentives not to worry about failure. Another advantage China had was, and this is just an advantage, I don't know how India can match it, is that the way that districts are defined for mayors, the boundaries are defined, they're metropolitan. For land use transport integration, this is the single biggest issue. That if you don't have Gurgaon in a different state and Noida in a different state from Delhi, you can do something. But here you've got geographical boundaries that span metropolitan areas, and that's impossible to deal with for someone at the city level. That China has that big advantage. And then the final one from Latin America is direct democracy at the city level. I mean, some people tell me India has too much democracy. And now that I work in LAC, I'm always surprised by that. I think India has too little democracy, especially at the city level. City level is where you have the most educated, the most informed people, where the coalition, social coalitions shift. And that is where you need good, solid democracy that is accountable and that has money. So I'll stop there. So I think these are some of the lessons from China and LAC.
Thanks, Shomik. I don't think I can say anything more to add to this. But let me turn to Madhav. You've heard everyone. You made the original presentation. Is there something you'd like to add to what you said there after hearing everyone?
I mean, really, what Shomik has said, I think, is quite strong as well. And I think, really, it's multiple levels of doing things. You know, at one level, sort of building the capacity and really doing it very quickly, both in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And, you know, the words he used of sort of creativity in mobilizing finance, I think that's one thing we have to figure out how to do it, because we've still done a good job of capacity building in the public sector, but we've absolutely not done anything about capacity building in the private sector. You know, Professor Swamy also spoke about lack of operators and contractors. You know, how can we create these incubators? How can we create these sort of the ways of really sort of, so that's one thing I think we really need to actively think about it, and actually really, in the point you raised, is really make a much like a benchmark of where we are in terms of even capacity, both in the public sector and in the private sector, and then sort of have that vision and then see, you know, how we sort of work towards that commitment. So I think, and there that will require a lot of sort of experimentation, a lot of creativity, a lot of failure, but I think it requires a big sort of cultural shift also as we start to do these things. But also I think some of the things that Adriana said, I mean, I mean, I'm quite impressed at how sort of, you know, they've really in some ways accepted that, you know, especially once you go to the cities that are 3, 4, 5 million, you know, to think about rail technology doesn't seem to be like the smartest choice, and really you can do much more with bus-based technologies, and that also makes these cities really sort of you know, very quickly become you know, modern sort of cities with good mass transit, and then can start to compete with the mega cities. One sort of statistic that has also been sort of really so something that's been in the news now, especially in the Chinese news, is this whole sort of Chinese investment in highway and metro rail, and especially metro rail. Now they're saying it's 1 trillion yuan, and you know, a lot of people in the media itself, local citizens in China, are asking, how are we going to sort of, where are we going to find the money to pay for maintaining sort of this massive investments in transport? And I'm quite curious sort of what's happening also in China in that. And, you know, we need to think about it. It's just, we're going to build in the next 10 years, but, you know, also as we build, how do we make sure that, you know, we have the money and the potential to make sure that these systems are maintained and don't create an unnecessary debt for the future generations?
Let me take this point. One last question to Dr. Krishna before I open it up for this last point. I think this is a very interesting point that you made about large investments. And once the investment is made, how do you find the resources to maintain those facilities? Any thoughts on this or any comments on this? Which
in case of urban projects, it is possible to, that's why financial viability is a must. There is no way, and to that extent we are now realizing that much dependence on government's resources as a grant is not very desirable, because it blurs the concept of financial viability at the first instance. And in course of time, when the government support is not available, then the sustainability becomes an issue. So that is one. And so we are looking for, I've said and I am repeating, that financial viability is what we are insisting. And we are finding that even mass transit projects can pay for themselves. That is the algorithm we have worked out, that when you introduce any mass transit project, the land value goes up. It goes without saying, but we have calculated the numbers also. And it turns out that the land value goes up so much that a small proportion of it, if it is taken out as development charge or whatever, it can pay for the project in capital cost. And then the development which it will bring in will pay for the maintenance cost. I mean, this is the broad paradigm. One can work on details. Secondly, in world, nothing is permanent. So something has to be born and something has to die. So we need not think that whatever we created must forever should remain viable and sustainable. So of that, some percentage will have to go out. Some percentage have to go out. It is a natural law. We need not fight much against it. But we should be conscious as to what is right, what is wrong, and consciously move on this. So these two things, and I think what you mentioned about this feeder services, very, very crucial. We are also realizing that when we bring in high cost project, like highest cost is the metro rail project, that is the highest cost project in urban transit system, followed by BRTS is also a high cost project, which are dedicated projects. That is how it becomes high cost. There is a monopoly kind of thing. The viaduct is monopolistic. You can't run anything else on that. Only metro coaches will run. And BRT also by definition is supposed to be monopolistic. So unless it is given feeder services, we are finding, even in Delhi metro we are finding that it is now some lines, some segments are not having the designed traffic. Some are overcrowded, but some are not. So these are the things we have to be consciously improvising by it, and things should work out. That's what we feel.
One more question. Picking up from what Shomik said about the Chinese example, this is to Karla. You can't think of a city without a pedestrian path, without a cycle track, or without a bus service. Do you think in the bank, do you see a role on what we could do maybe with the smaller cities, medium-sized cities, in trying to get these basics, some support in terms of capacity or planning or whatever, to work with smaller and medium-sized cities to help them move towards a public transport preference or a non-motorized transport preference rather than a car preference?
As I was saying in the beginning, definitely the way that we need to make us as a neutral role in developing this kind of dialogue between the government, the state government, and the national government, it is crucial, I believe, for India. If we can manage to go beyond that idea of each person accountable for different things, instead of asking and having this dialogue so everyone can be accountable for changing something and supporting any kind of system. And the other thing that I would like to say is that we still have time in the cities that are under 10 million people. We still have time to go and put pilot projects and more experiment things in those cities. Perhaps we are not, perhaps no, definitely we are too late in the cities that are more than 20 million, 30 million, because now they are already in trouble. But those that you still have medium size and small size are the ones that we should be able to focus more almost immediately, because then we will have time to develop pilots or to develop good practices that we can share with the rest of India.
Thanks, Karla. Any comments? Comments, questions from the audience? 1, 2, 3. Okay, you start. You're on the mic already.
Thank you.
And
hi, I'm Jason Hill from the U.S. Department of Transportation. I've got kind of two brief questions. The first, India seems to have a very unique relationship with using the PPP, the public-private partnership model, and I, in fact, toured recently the Hyderabad Metro Rail project being built by Larsen & Toubro. And I was just wondering, that seems to, handing over these projects to a private company as well as ring roads, other expressways as well, seems to add another layer in. So we talk about the need for the consumer, the rider, driving how the system is run, but that accountability can be stifled by the need to create a profit for these corporations that are now running the transit system. So I was wondering if you could talk about India's kind of relationship with the PPP model to finance these large-scale projects, but if that's creating challenges in delivering results for the people who use them. And secondly, just kind of as a branch off of that, land acquisition continues to seem to be a major problem for building these projects. You have specific central government regulations that require religious locations to be protected, people who are living by the road to be protected. Could you just talk a little bit about the challenges India faces with land acquisition and transit?
thank you. We'll take this set of questions, then I'll go back to the panel for...
Okay, hi. Thanks for what's been a really great, almost profound discussion so far. I wanted to ask, thinking about some of the government institutions in India and talking about what a massive project and how much integration is needed to plan for these large metropolitan areas. And I wanted to ask what you thought could be done to empower the UMTAs, the Unified Metropolitan Transportation Authorities, that are kind of starting to be formed in some of the cities. ITDP, who I work with, has been doing a bit of work trying to improve the capacity in Chennai Unified Metropolitan Transportation Authority, but it's quite a task to not only to consolidate powers related to transportation from several different ministries, but then also that doesn't even bring into play land use and development, which of course also needs to be coordinated. So what can be done there? And then I also just any other specific comments about what you all would recommend changes to the new, like the replenishment of the JN and URM that will be coming up, I believe, in about a year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, OP. I'm just in some ways reacting to, responding to Shomik's points. If you look at the democratic systems and the way they function in India, I think the tendency is, yes, they take time. Yes, they are fairly. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that the context in which China functions is very, very different to the way India functions. Yes, China has done some good things in setting up the establishment, setting up the agencies, getting the processes in place. And I think reflecting on the fact that we've been a free country for 65 years now, yes, every city has to provide a minimum of minimum standard of roads and pedestrian pathways, making sure that the basic necessities are met. But I think I think the biggest role that an institution like the World Bank can play is to contextualize it to India, and because it's a democratic country, there are rigorous processes that the country follows in terms of legislation. And there is more and more accountability coming in. Now people are asking questions. Bangalore is a good example, and the ministry is also striving quite hard in terms of making sure that the decisions are transparent, and there is more accountability in terms of what the allocation of funds, how the funds are used, what outcomes, and an outcome-driven approach is something that is being emphasized. So I think the biggest a role that the World Bank can play is to try and bring those best practices, but those best practices are in a different cultural context. And the Indian context, I'm not saying it doesn't work in India, it will work, but I think the key is to try and build some of those capacities within the institutions, and try and get that translation a kind of deeper level than leave it at the state or the central government. Thank you.
Thanks.
Initially, to Shomik, you mentioned about how in China especially, the local leaders, mayors, or the city leaders are learning by doing. They allow them to fail and then learn from that and go to the best possible solutions for problems. And hopefully that's the same situation in Latin America too. But what is the incentive in that case, at least in China and Latin America, for the political leadership to fail and then move to the right path? When I look back in India, at least our mayors, the political leadership change every 2 or 3 years. We rarely see the same leadership continuing for 5 years, and definitely after 5 years you see a change. So what is the incentive for that leader, political leader especially, to fail? If they fail, they are going to lose the next election. So what is incentive here for them to do that? And unless there is that incentive that is beyond those political systems, how can we bring that sustainable effort for long term? And that probably will, the next part of that question is for Mr. Sudhir Krishna. that you have been working in that system, working with these political leaders for so many years at different levels. How do you deal with these political bosses, political leaders, and convince them that this is the right thing to do, which you may not see in your 5-year tenure in your results, but this is the right thing to do over the long term? How do you convince them? If we can learn from those aspects from other places and apply in India, or maybe we have examples in India itself. I can think of Sabarmati Riverfront development in Ahmedabad, which has been going on for more than 10 years under different political leaders in Ahmedabad itself. But that, I think, is a critical aspect that we can learn.
Let me go back to the panel and very quick, one minute. But let me start with Dr. Krishna. Any reactions? And then Shomik after that, because some of them were.
One is that on PPP mode, the question was that Hyderabad Metro and so on, what has been the experience? And we have found that the PPP is not a one-size-fit-all approach. Size means in terms of type of project and sector and location to an extent, the experience has been varied. So we are realizing that it is a learning, we are on the learning curve in the PPP, and both the private partner and the government agencies both are on the learning curve, and then every second effort is better than the previous one. As far as land acquisition is concerned, we are now trying to a different model which is using the town planning regulations for land acquisition. That is a model which Gujarat has pioneered, so to say. And in Gujarat, in Surat and Ahmedabad, the ring road has been developed or approved, and the lands have been taken possession without forcible acquisition of 1 square inch also. It is just by allowing people better land use, mixed land use for the remaining land which remains with them, and also by allowing higher level of development in physical and usage terms. So that has compensated more than the cost of the land. And on the Unified Mass Transit Authority, yes, it is true that in a myriad of authorities it is one more, but there is a challenge, and we are trying to resolve it by putting all the parallel authorities on the board of this unified authority so that they are able to work together. And I should also bring to your notice that when feeder service, you said we are having a serious shortage of buses in the country. The bus manufacturers are simply not there. And especially you just change the specification than what is going on for last 50 years, and you have to wait for 1 year to get the buses. Anything you want to improvise, but cars you want, the best of the cars are manufactured in the country. And you pay later, buy now and pay in monthly installment. But for bus you have to pay upfront at least half the amount. So if some way can be found out, I have requested Karla already, and anybody can, the manufacturers of bus systems can participate. In minibuses, we are having acute shortage of feeder buses. Feeder buses have to, small buses not. And the last point was about political something. So I should say that the realization has come already, as somebody said elsewhere, that good economics is good politics. That is how this is answered.
Shomik.
A couple of points. I think first this point of contextualizing lessons to India is very important, okay? And I think I wanted to be careful about it, but perhaps was not careful enough. You have to be very careful about what you learn from China, obviously. And I tried to focus on things that I think are relevant to India, decentralization. I mean, I'll give you a radical idea. Cities should be their own states. That's, Delhi. But Delhi, of course, is so complicated because national government, this, that, and the other. But if the cities could be large metropolitan areas, they're bigger than some European countries. If they were their own states, okay, you would create all this direct democracy of an urban population with decentralization, administrative authority, okay? To me, that is, that's your solution right there. It's a solution that's culturally contextual, and it responds to what are the incentives that drove things in China. Your question, very good question, about incentives to fail. I mean, really, I think this is a challenge for, I've never seen it outside China, okay? So it's not like, I think this is unique about China. They have created an atmosphere that has incentives to fail and learn. And how within your own culture you can craft those incentives, is very difficult for someone from outside government to say. This is really, I think, the challenge for government to think about and make it worthwhile. But there is one principle, which is very simple, which is risk and reward, right? Now, my sense of, and this is not the politicians, because I think the Secretary made a very good point that India's turned some sort of corner where now good economics is now good politics. Okay, you're seeing this over and over again. Not always, but over and over again. But I think the layer of Indian government, which is, in my sense, could be made more responsive to performance management, is the civil service. Okay, and my sense is that the incentive structure in civil service is very biased towards inaction. Okay, because where you land up at the end of your career, really, my sense is, depends on your rank in the exam coming in, plus the fact that you've had no major flare-up in your career. So when someone is a municipal commissioner, their main incentive, if they are trying to save their career, is just to get through that job. So to change that risk, so to have performance targets, and in China everyone is measured on a performance target. It's numerical, and there's lots of things wrong with it, again. But it creates a clear incentive to perform. And if you fail on small things, if you perform on the big things, you'll be okay. I want to make one suggestion on the NERM. There was a question on NERM. I think to try and see if how a project like NERM can balance project-based finance with formula-based finance. Because formula-based finance, first of all, makes much more sense for small cities and medium cities. You can't do you don't have the capacity, and you shouldn't be trying to build the capacity everywhere simultaneously. So for small and medium cities, formula-based funds that give you some amount of funds in a stable way, based on your population and needs, could be a big boon, okay, with some guidelines on how to spend it. And also formula-based funds or other ways to empower cities, okay, by letting them raise their own taxes, have the ability for the national government to play this role of managing capacity, managing reform, without tying it to a project. If you tie it to a project, at some stage, the people of the federal government want to disperse the money, because they have to disperse the money. So it's very difficult to maintain some sort of integrity of any planning efforts you're trying to improve or any reform efforts. And I think this we found out from national programs over and over and over again. Stop there.
Karla.
Just regarding this empowering that we are talking about, there are 2 R's for empowering when you are trying to reach people. One is they understand the rights, which is something that more and more often we see that a lot of cultures, they just don't understand the rights. The right to have a sidewalk to walk, the right to can cross safely, the right to go to the school without risking their life. This kind of education, I think that we can improve. There is a lot of room to improve. The other R is risk. We need to raise awareness regarding the risk among the government and among the states, that there is a lot of risk involved every time that you make a decision on building a new road. And when you are dealing with urban things, there is a lot of risk involved. But I believe that we haven't got enough either time or creativity to show to the people, to the massive people, that they are in danger whenever they are going to the schools or they are going to the work or they are just in every daily life. And I think that if we can start sharing this kind of engagement with the people, we might be able to see engineers thinking differently, in the schools and the universities start thinking differently on ways of bringing these issues in the table in a different way.
Thank you. Adriana?
Well, I think one very important thing is really the kind of model of cities we are thinking of. It's so much being built that every new greenfield development is actually as important and very important to think on what's the structure of the new roads, which kind of service is going to be provided. So I see a huge opportunity because Greenland development is so open. So using resources wisely is certainly one very important thing. Because I talked so much about transport, I would like to give a bit of a broader perspective first in terms of really thinking the cities are thinking the cities right. It's very important that everybody really knows they have the right for a sidewalk. That having a sidewalk is as important or much more important than having a lane for cars. I think people have for a long time a wrong idea in their minds on what comes first. And I think until this kind of communication doesn't reach the common of the citizens, it's going to be very hard to get support enough to have these systems right. And then to the other side extremely is really on the use of the public money and the subsidies and the PPPs. After Mexico had to recover all the toll roads in the country, I would say that very fast we learned that if we are going to give any subsidy, it's better to prevent it first and know how we are going to pay for it. And not, whoops, you know, the demand is not there. And now, because it always becomes to be very expensive and it starts to bleed the money for investment, which is the one we really need for the future.
Thanks. Shivanand, any last quick comment?
I'd like to make 2 quick points. One, I think capacities when we are discussing, it's not just that institutions, academic, have all the capacity. I think by participating and by partnering, I think the capacities come forward, and then ministry encourages us to work with AMC, and how do we build that partnership, I think is one important part of it. And number 2, while we talk about transport or urban development per se, the scale, whatever we look at it, we still don't have one urban management program in the country today. And how do we create something of that kind, I think is probably the way forward. Thank you.
Madhav. You have a question?
Yes, I do.
Let me finish. I don't think there'll be time for an answer, but I'll let you pose your comment or this thing.
Thank you very much. I'll make it more a comment.
Madhav.
I just want to thank everybody. There's a wealth of information that has come out, and so I think we will make an effort to document this and circulate it also with a larger audience.
Yeah, it's relevant to what the professor was saying in terms of capacity building. My name is Miller Krogat. I'm from the PDV group in Germany. We provide the transport planning software and consultancy and education programs. When we look in India, we aspire to be in the market, but we face bureaucratic challenges that inhibit companies like mine to actually produce more good transport planners, people educated. So if there was a way of diminishing the bureaucratic binds and holes that hold us back, that would help, I think. I also had a bit of a philosophical debate last night with some friends. We live in societies that are allowed to aspire, and owning a private vehicle is an aspirational goal of many people. It strikes me that you do have to make public transport attractive to diminish their desire to drive around in an air-conditioned car. And unless that's addressed in the public transport sector, we will always face these questions for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am being reminded constantly that we need the room for the next session now. I'll end up with just one quick comment, picking up from what Dr. Sudhir Krishna said about, for several years, the plan in India was keep people in the rural areas. India lives in the rural areas. But a comment that the then Minister for Urban Development made when the JNNURM was launched, and his statement was, today is a red letter day, because today we recognize that urbanization is irreversible. I think that was a very profound statement, recognizing that we have to now look after our urban areas. That was what JNNURM did. Well, with that, let me thank the panel. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank everyone for being here.